Hey, Bridge family, it's really good to see you all. I am honored to get to guest lead this morning. And as you guys huddle around your computers or out in your backyards, watching church from home, staying safe, I just wanted to introduce a new song to you. It's called Run to the Father. It's one that I was blessed to learn for our CMA churches up in Longview and Kelso. And it's been such a huge blessing to me, this song, through this whole craziness of the pandemic. So I wanted to teach it to you so you guys could enjoy it. It's Cody Carnes and Carrie Job singing it. You can Google it. It's an absolute spectacular song live. But anyway, I'll do my best to bring you something somewhat near, but nothing compared to them. So here's how the chorus goes like this. Run to the Father, fall into grace, done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend, so I'll run to the Father again and again and again and again. Carried a burden for too long on my own. I wasn't created, oh, to bear it alone. I hear your invitation, oh, to let it all go. And I see it now, I'm laying it down. I know that I believe in the Son. I believe in the risen one. I believe I overcome by the power of his blood. Amen. Amen. I'm alive because he lives. Amen. Amen. Let my song join the one who never ends because he lives. I was dead in the grave. I was covered in sin and shame. I heard mercy call my name. Oh, and he rolled the stone away. Amen. Amen. I'm alive because he lives. Amen. Amen. Let my song join the one who never ends because he lives. I can face tomorrow because he lives. Every fear is gone. I know he holds my life, my future in his hand. Amen. Amen. I'm alive because he lives. Amen. Amen. Let my song join the one who never ends. Amen. Amen. I'm alive because he lives. Amen. Amen. Let my song join the one who never ends because he lives. Oh yeah, because he lives.
Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to April 19th, a beautiful Sunday morning. I want to start by just thanking Steve Carson for all the hard work that he's done. You send him an email, send him a text just of gratitude. He has set up all of the production for the church in the last month. We would not be able to do what we're doing without his help and his support. And hopefully he won't delete this part.
We'll see.
When I was 18 years old, I moved away to college, moved to Minnesota. But I decided I didn't really like that college, and I wasn't doing well living in Minnesota, so I moved back to California where my parents, they were living in LA at the time, and so I moved into a garage they had in the back of the house, and no one had ever used this garage for anything other than storage, so I got in there and I turned it into an apartment, and that kind of became my life, was that little garage / apartment. And I got a job as a waiter, and quickly just got back into another college, started going into school. And I remember I was coming home one night, late at night, having been a waiter, and I was exhausted. My feet were tired, and I went straight from work into my bed. I don't remember taking my clothes off. I'm pretty certain I did not. And I just crashed. I woke a few hours later, and what woke me is about 2 a.m. Lights were just flooding through this window, the one window in this garage, just flooding in, and it was hitting me in the face, and it just startled me. It woke me up. So I get out, I walk outside trying to figure out what's going on. Why is there this giant light and I get out there, and there's this helicopter flying with this beam coming down, and it's sweeping all over the backyard or into the neighbor's yard. But that light had just nailed me, because apparently there was some fugitive of the law that was running around trying to evade capture, and my backyard was possibly one of the places they were looking. So I just subtly moved back in, locked my little door, dove back under my bed, and stayed there until morning. I was not going to come out. And what was amazing was that I was sleeping, oblivious to the excitement and action that was going on just outside the door, until that spotlight hit me and woke me up. In the Christian experience, we really want to master and perfect spirituality. And the reality is, a lot of us think we're doing really well. But the whole Christian experience is counterintuitive. You do not conquer the Christian life. I grew up with a lot of ambition, a lot of enthusiasm and idealism for how Christian faith was supposed to be lived. And I think God actually liked my passion and my zeal. But what I really wanted was I wanted to conquer the Christian faith. And then I had the spotlight hit me. And today I'm mostly talking to those who really have a deep heart and a hunger for God. And if you don't have a deep heart and hunger for God, I'm glad you're listening, but I'm not really gearing this talk to you. I don't want to pressure you, but I hope that there's some things that I say that you can really connect deeply to, and maybe where you are in your life, and kind of give you a glimpse of what the Christian living can be all about. Richard Rohr, in his book, which is such a great counterintuitive book called Everything Belongs. I have it on my shelf. It's a great book. I even have it as an audiobook. It's a fantastic one. It's been one of the best reads I've read over the last several years. He's a wonderful Catholic man. He leads a retreat center, and he's helped a lot of people reach back into healthy traditions of Christian faith, helping us dig into our spirituality. But he gives this great quote. He says, "The only true perfection available to us is the honest acceptance of our imperfection." That quote hasn't left my mind as I've been going about my Christian journey the last several months. The only true perfection available to us is the honest acceptance of our imperfections. So often in our Christian experience, the goal is to conquer weakness, to conquer brokenness, and to conquer our sinfulness. As I was growing up in my Christian life, I felt a lot of shame because I was not living up to the idealism that I had. I had this really high idealism, but I was having this really low encounter or transformation. And I was ashamed that I was never able to kind of reach close to the idealism that I had been taught I was supposed to be able to have as a Christian. And so I started to slip into shame, and I felt like I had failed God. A lot of times I felt like I had even failed myself. And I was pouring myself into my Christian faith with all of this energy, and but I always had this sense of inadequacy and shame and disappointment that followed. And I know many of you grew up in churches that were probably similar to the one I grew up in. And as a kid in my Sunday school class, when I was probably about 4 years old, I remember singing this song that they taught me. It was, "Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. There's a Father up above, and He's looking down in love. So be careful, little eyes, what you see." And when I sang that song, I never understood that there's a Father up above who's looking down in love. I don't know that I sang the words, but I never heard it. I never understood it, because what was emphasized to me and what I heard over and over and over, what had the largest impact onto me was, be careful, little eyes, what you see. And because if you don't, you might disappoint God, and He might get angry at you, Kenny. And so you need to be careful, little eyes, and you need to have careful little ears what you hear, and careful little feet where you walk. And what I learned was that in the Christian life, it's all about guarding myself and mastering those things, especially as a little kid, I've got to master these things. And then as a teenager, I need to master these things. And as an adult, I should really be learning to master these things. I was like this Avis Rent-A-Car ad, which they had the slogan, well, we try harder. And as I tried harder to do it right for God, I felt like I needed to conquer this Christian journey. And as I did it, I had absolutely no joy. There was no love. And the reality is I felt very lost and confused a lot. And if you are the person who wants to be conquering and growing, and you're ambitious and you're excited and you're forceful about being the person that God really wants you to be, all of that is good. That's not a bad thing. Never lose your idealism of what God wants to do in your life. Don't ever lose that. And we also need to hear that the whole Christian experience is counterintuitive. Just when you think you know the way that it's supposed to work, or the way that you really want it to work, God comes and wants to work in a whole different direction in our hearts and in our lives. One of my favorite Bible stories is in Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. It says, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. He said, 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and he prayed." And the footnote says he prayed to himself, "God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all I get." But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. The messed up and miserable tax collector who had ideals but said, "I can't seem to get out of my life and be who it is that you want me to be, God. I can't ever seem to rise to that level, the level that I really wish I could live at, God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." This man went home justified. In this passage, we have 2 different kinds of spirituality that are being shown to us here. You have the Pharisee spirituality, and then you have the tax collector spirituality. The focus of the Pharisee spirituality is on mastery. It's on mastering the Christian disciplines that we have. Richard Foster, fantastic author, he wrote this book about 30 or more years ago called The Celebration of Discipline. Such a great book. And the church really needed the book when it was written. It was a fantastic need, because what it did was it helped the church to recover a lot of the things that the church really needed to recover, to see the disciplines of faith as a celebration, as something that we really desire. It's not meant to be a rule or these laws. And Richard Foster would also tell you the goal is never to master these or even to conquer the spiritual disciplines. Praying, solitude, fasting, all of these wonderful things, serving, simplicity, giving. There's so many great disciplines of the Christian faith. And there's, he says at the beginning of the book, he says right on the jacket cover, it says, what I don't want you to do is, the goal is not to conquer. That isn't the objective here. But somehow, wired inside of me and wired inside of so many of us is this desire to try and master it regardless. We want to be these spiritual achievers. We want to be able to lead the way, for God. For us, pleasing God is so much about achieving and proving ourselves to God and proving ourselves to ourselves. We want to feel better about our Christian experience, because if we feel good, well, then God must feel good about us too. And so the whole thing, our relationship with God, it starts to rest on how we think God feels about us and how we feel we're doing in our Christian journey. How many of you woke up this morning and you had a quiet time or a devotion time with God? Because I bet a lot of you would say, well, I try to do that at least. And then how many of you feel like God likes you more on the days that you did your quiet time and your devotion time? That He likes you more than maybe on those days that you kind of slept in and you didn't do it? And how many of you feel like God loves you more on the week that you're more actively living out your faith than on the week where you just feel overwhelmed by life and you don't really feel like you're connecting to God spiritually? And how many of you feel like you want God's favor on the days that you did it right? You somehow want some extra treat or reward, and you feel a little bit better in your journey and your walk with God. Something is seriously wrong here. And the whole thing is based on what I think I have to prove. How many of us are trying to get something nailed down when it comes to being spiritual achievers? I want to prove to myself and believe that I can kind of blaze my way forward. And God tells me, He comes to me and says, Kenny, that's what the Pharisee does. He's trying to prove himself. The tax collector, he knows he has nothing to prove, and he is the one who goes home justified. The Pharisee also needed to compare. The Pharisee looks at other people, says, you know what? I'm really glad I'm not like them. I'm really glad about that, because some of us, as we're pursuing our faith and our Christianity with such intensity, we start to look around to others. Well, how are they doing in their journey? And are they really serious about their faith? I mean, because I know I'm really serious, and I'm taking this commitment to God very seriously. And I thank God I'm not like some of those other people who are really just kind of wasting a lot of their lives. They're really making some bad decisions, not connecting to God and living how God wants them to. Because the thing is, the reality is, I'm intensely committed about my Christian journey because I've got something going on. I've got something alive. I have something that's real. And others that others may not be doing, they don't have it figured out like maybe I'm starting to really figure it out, because I've really got some maturity to me, and I feel good about that. And it's too bad they don't have their stuff together, because I'm making better decisions than they are. And I feel better about myself. And I think God feels better about me too because of that. I think God likes me more. And I'm better than them. And I think God knows that. But I don't know that I'd ever say that out loud. But it's still true. When I do the things that the Pharisee did, I do feel better about myself. Sometimes I do look at what other people are doing. I fast, I tithe, I pray. I mean, can there be any more significant disciplines for the Christian faith and our journey than tithing and praying? Because if I can conquer those, if I can take those disciplines, if I can conquer this fasting thing, then I know I'm really going to be on the top of the list. Because no one can fast like me. I fast 1 day a week, 1 week a year. I mean, because who does that? Who does that? I do that. I mean, but who else would do such a thing as that? And then I talk to other people in here, they've never even fasted. Oh, they're totally missing out on what God really wants us to be doing. And what would happen if you start to get some of these things really nailed down, though? What would happen if you really did get that? I mean, what would happen if you could raise your hand and say, I've got a really good prayer life. In fact, I've got it nailed down. I mean, it takes like 0.4 seconds before God and we're just connected. Oh, see, I just got it right there. That fast, I'm on. What if we could do that? Because I hope none of us would actually ever be able to say that. Not saying that I don't wish we could do that, but I hope we would never say that or even think that. Well, I'm really good at witnessing when I talk to other people. I mean, because I serve God, I try harder, I work at this, and when I can't, I've kind of led other people to believe that I do. So then I start to fake people out as we grow into our Christian walk, because in the weeks that I didn't fast or that I didn't reach out, I need still people to believe that I'm still doing it, that I'm not somehow backsliding. So I need to have people believe that I'm somehow still very spiritually attuned to what God is doing, and then people would still look up to me. When I was a college pastor, And even when I was at seminary, I knew how to do this. I wanted to be the go-to guy. I wanted to be the guy that people would come to and admire, and they would seek out my wisdom, and they would believe that I was connected to God, and they would seek me out, and I would secretly tell myself I don't have any of these things nailed down as well as I let other people seem to think I do. And so I would continue to talk and continue to act and walk in a way that let others believe that I was still very much connected to God. When I was 13 years old, this is good. When I was 13 years old, I went to a camp that taught me how to ride horses. It was this horse camp for it was called the Boys Brigade, which is anyhow, it's this boys club and this thing, and we went away for a week, and for the first 4 days of the week, they taught us how to care for horses, how to groom them, how to ride them, how to be safe. And then the last 3 days of the camp, we went on this trail ride. The trail ride was awesome. So you've got these 15 boys, we've got a couple counselors, we're riding horses. We're on the dusty trails in the back mountains of California, and we're taking care of the horses, we're sleeping, we're taking turns watching them at night, and we're bedding down, and we were just rugged. And the thing is, we didn't have to shower for 3 days. I felt like at the end of that week, I was a horseman. I was a cowboy, and I was a real cowboy, not one of those fake ones. I knew how to ride a horse. I knew how to not fall off a horse, and I knew how to care for horses. 1 week, I had mastered this. So I get back to going, I went back home at the end of the week, and I had this really good friend who owned horses, and I was living in Santa Barbara. And he's like, hey, you should come out and ride horses with me. I'm like, totally. I got this thing down. He's like, we should ride bareback on the beach. I'm like, bareback? Well, I've never ridden bareback. I didn't say that. I was thinking that. And so I was like, well, how hard can this be? And I started to get a little nervous. So I go over to his house, and we put the harnesses on the horses, and we walk him down to the beach. As soon as we get to the beach, he just whips up onto the back of his horse, and he waits for me. I didn't know how to get on that horse, so he jumps down. He kind of helps me get on, and he goes back to his horse. He jumps on the back, bareback, and off he rides. I was ready to walk that horse. But I wasn't ready for what happened next. My horse watched his horse immediately go into a sprint. And so my horse thought, oh, this is what we're doing. That horse shot out, and I stayed sitting while that horse left me, and I fell into the sand, completely humiliated and embarrassed. I just sat there in the sand, completely humbled. I had no idea what I was doing. I needed a horse that was slow. I needed a horse that had a saddle, and that saddle had to have a pommel so that I could hold on to that sucker. I got caught doing something that I was really trying to pretend. In the Christian experience, so many of us, we're really good at faking it or believing that we have it all mastered. And so we want to believe it. We tell ourselves we've got it nailed down, or we want others to believe it. And we want to come off as a Christian where we have it all together, when the reality is we don't have it all together. And we disappoint ourselves, and we're trying not to disappoint others. The great character Sisyphus was a guy who was condemned to roll a stone up the hill, only to have this giant stone roll back down on him. Too many years of my life were like Sisyphus, where I felt like I was rolling this stone up the hill in my Christian journey. I felt like I had this giant weight on my shoulder that I was trying to push up this hill, and I didn't ever feel like I was ever going to get it to the top, and I could never win, because so much of my faith was based on my effort and not God. And I always felt unworthy to come before God, and so what I would do is I would try harder and harder and harder to find ways to make myself more and more worthy. I wanted to get God to like me. I wanted God to love me. I would push that rock as hard as I could with my shoulder, and I'd push that thing up the hill, and then I would fail. And then shame and guilt and humiliation, embarrassment would fall on me, and just kind of this weight, and it felt like it was just rolling down on me and crushing me every time. And then I would start to try and roll that rock right back up, doing the exact same things that I'd always been taught I was supposed to do. And I kept thinking, this time I'm going to make it to the top. I'm going to get to where it is I need to be. Sisyphus never did, and he never could get that boulder up to the top. And that's what he was condemned to do for the rest of his life. And if you accomplish this, if you do get your spiritual journey to the top of the hill, you're actually in the most dangerous place of all. You have taken the place of God in your own life. And I learned that what I have to do is fall at the bottom of the hill and let that stone just roll over me. To realize I can't conquer the Christian life the way that I thought I was supposed to. Which leads us to the tax collector spirituality, because he had a spirituality also. In verse 13 it says, "But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, 'God, have mercy on me, a sinner.'" The tax collector turned everything upside down in such a great way. As Jesus is telling the story, he's turning the whole thing upside down. Instead of trying hard like the tax collector, instead of trying harder with the tax collector, what he does is he falls into brokenness. There's no presumption of achievements, no presumption of being able to get this Christian life perfect so that God would be happy with us and I could finally feel good about myself. The surprise of the story, which is so great, is because you had all these people that were listening when Jesus was originally telling this story, and they all knew exactly where the story was supposed to lead. They're like, yes, we love this. We know where the story is going to go, because he wants to be like the Pharisee. And everyone who's listening to the story, they wanted to be just like the Pharisee too. The story was supposed to make them feel good that, hey, we're going in the right direction. Achievement, success. This is really what it's about. But somehow this tax collector is going to do it even better. And if we memorize more, if we give more, if I pray, if I fast, if I do more, but then Jesus takes it and the story goes in a complete different direction, flipping this around, spinning everyone on their heads. Counterintuitive spirituality. Pete Singay, in his book, The Fifth Discipline, he tells a story about a canoe trip up to Maine. And he wrote this. He said, "We had come to a small dam. And we had put to shore, and we had to portage around a dam because we didn't want to go over it because that wasn't safe. But a second group arrived, and there was a young man who had been drinking too much, and he didn't want to portage his rubber raft around the dam, so he decided to go down the spillway over it. But when he got to the bottom, the raft overturned after going over the dam, and he was dumped into the freezing water. Unable to reach him, we watched in horror as he struggled desperately to swim downstream against the backwash at the base of the dam. His struggle only lasted a few minutes until he had nothing left to give, and he stopped all of his struggling. Immediately, his limp body was sucked down into the swirling waters. Seconds later, he popped up 10 yards downstream, free of the maelstrom at the base of the dam. What he had tried in vain to achieve, the currents accomplished for him within seconds. In the Christian walk, the thing that you have to do is what might take you out in the end. And that is, I need to fight against the forces of powers of darkness. I need to fight. I need to have a stronger Christian life. I need to just grit it. I need to just muscle up and power through. There's one thing that amazes me about the tax collector. He was desperate to not be a sinner. He was broken. He didn't want to keep living that way. He was tired of living that way. He had enough parties. He had enough of the high times. He had ripped off enough people and done enough deceptive things in people's lives. He was done with that life. He was trying to find, how do I get out of this life? How do I get out of this? And Jesus was kind enough to tell him how not to do it. And I love that God doesn't let us have it our own way. The tax collector spirituality. I'm sure you've seen this great picture that's been all over the internet for years now. Several years ago, it was really popular of an iceberg where the colors, you would look at it, you kind of like where you've got the bottom half underwater and the top half is above water, and you just see these vibrant colors, and they're just spectacular. And it's just kind of this mesmerizing shot that you're like, is this a Photoshop picture? Is this real? And it's just an amazing thing. As we move forward in our Christian lives, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or 40 years, however much time you have, you need to know that as much as you move forward in the Christian life, the bottom of what is in us is always pretty much going to stay that big. You might be able to lift the iceberg an inch or two up, or even a foot or two up as you walk with God, and learn how to lean into God and learn more and more about yourself. But the more I move into my Christian journey, the more I realize there's a lot more stuff underneath. I always thought the goal was to kind of get all that stuff out. We got to do complete healing and transformation, and I can finally get rid of that iceberg. But the reality is, I'm going to have that bottom half, that iceberg, more than half. That's probably going to be there my entire life. So you might be tempted to wonder, well, how do we get that stuff out so we can deal with it? But in the end, the reason why Jesus Christ died to save us is not so that we can get that whole iceberg out and deal with it. It's so that we don't have to get the whole iceberg out. That's the point. There's so much inside of each of us. I think God spares us the knowledge of seeing how much really is underneath the water in our hearts and in our lives. Isaiah screams out as God's holiness just pours over him. He says, "Woe is me. Woe is me. I just began to feel the bottom of the iceberg, and it feels unbearable. God could just wipe me out with a vision, and I don't know why he hasn't wiped me out." Paul also got this understanding. When he writes in Corinthians, he says, in the spring of 56, I am the least of my apostles. And then he says in the fall of 60, he says, I am now the least of all people. And then in the fall of 62, he says, I am the worst of all sinners. This is kind of a descent in his life. It starts, I'm bad, oh, I'm worse, oh, I'm the worst. From apostle to God's people to everyone out there. He says, I'm just getting so in touch with my stuff. Who would I be to elevate myself above anyone? I am the chief of sinners. I'm beginning to see really how dark my life really is and how big the iceberg is under the water. Philippians 3:8-9 is Paul's famous text. He says, I've lost all things and I'm not looking to have it all together and prove to myself or God like I used to do when I was a Pharisee. Because now I just consider all that stuff junk, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness that is of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith. In the evangelical church, we love to preach this and then challenge people, okay? Go and, now go out and prove yourself to God and be obedient and win his favor. And we have to keep pulling ourselves back to these counterintuitive truths that are all throughout the Bible, and just really so much of it is packed in the New Testament. We need to know something about the Christian experience. Devotion is more important than discipline. An awareness of who you are and who God is, and the stunning truth and the fact that you are in a relationship with him. That precedes all disciplines to the pathway to God, right there. And when we put discipline before devotion, and when we put discipline before a higher view of God and a deeper reality of ourselves, suddenly we're on the wrong side of the line and we're starting to play life out differently, as how Paul defined it's supposed to be right here. True spirituality is never found in our accomplishments or a spirituality that revolves around ourselves. I don't know if you've ever hung out with someone and they ask you, so how are you doing spiritually? And they're really serious and they're really intent. I don't know if you've ever heard that. I've heard it a lot. And sadly, I think I've asked it a lot. When someone asks you that question, how do you feel? How are you doing spiritually? I don't know if you can feel it right now. Because when I hear that, something just starts to churn in me. That's my first response. My brain starts to spin, and I start to think about, what happened today? What's been going on the last week? What happened the last month? I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm trying to do it as fast as I can. What's going on in my life that's good? Because I need to be able to share something that's really good, because that's really all they want to know. They want to know what's good in my life that I can share, so that they know that I'm growing and that I'm moving forward, that I'm not failing, and I'm not blowing it, because I can't share the bad thing, because my grandma used to ask me that every time. So how are you? I would have to plan ahead. I know I'm going to meet my grandma. She's going to want to know, how are you doing spiritually? So I would plan 3 answers that would make her feel very okay that I'm doing all right and she doesn't have to worry about me. What is that all about? How are you doing spiritually? How's this for a question? How is God doing spiritually? I like that question better. Because He's doing really good on my behalf. And He's doing really good on your behalf. How are you doing spiritually? That's God's deal as He moves us along. But to start saying, you know what, I'm doing really good spiritually, or that I'm feeling really good about my Christian life, that could be a sign that you're starting to fall off the edge. Paul doesn't go there in his writings. He never went there in his writings. I mean, where would we ever read Paul say something like this? Well, I feel really good about what I'm doing. I'm growing spiritually. I'm getting a lot of things done. I'm getting a lot of my disciplines nailed down. I'm practicing my quiet time daily. I'm learning to tithe. I've learned to practice a more simple lifestyle. And I'm really growing in my prayer life. And I feel really good about this. How are you doing spiritually? And I go, where does this stuff come from? And I'm not saying that we don't need to be involved in doing these things, because I think we really do. Of course we do. But it's not about winning God's favor or impressing other people or feeling better about myself. It's about learning to walk in a relationship with God, to love Him more, to depend on Him more, depend on His righteousness, and to let Him draw me to Himself, not measuring myself, but measuring Him all the time as the one who is adequate, the only one who's adequate for me, and for us to draw me to Him. And that is totally counterintuitive to me trying to work this out all by myself. In the Pharisee's prayer, it says he prayed to himself. In the tax collector's prayer, he's filled with this humility where he's kind of orbiting around God, because that's what happens. Our spirituality is orbiting around God. You talk to Mother Teresa, if you could have, you're able to ever have talked to Billy Graham, you talk to the saints as they're moving further and further along in their Christian life journey. There's something you need to know about these people, which is the longer they go, the more they find they're more and more aware of their deep and great need for God. Their idealism about wanting to be like Christ never fades, and the reality and awareness that they have to depend on God for that rises to higher and higher and higher levels through their entire lives. There's this man, he dies, goes to heaven, and stands before the gates where St. Peter's waiting for him. And Peter tells him, well, here's how it works. You stand here at the entrance, and what we're going to do is you tell me all the good deeds that you've done, and we're going to add them all up. And what you need to do is you need to get 100 points. And if you can tell me all of your good deeds, and if they add up to 100 points, you get to go to heaven and you get to come on inside. The guy's like, oh, that's fantastic. I can do that. So he starts, he goes, well, I've been married to the same woman for 50 years and I never cheated on her. Not even in my heart did I ever cheat on her. St. Peter replies, oh, that's wonderful. That's worth 3 points right there. Fantastic. 3 points. Huh. Well, I attended church my life. I mean, I went to Sunday school. I even taught Sunday school when I was an adult. I supported the ministries of the church. I always tithed. I never shorted the church or God, and I gave my offerings. Oh, that's terrific, says Peter. That's definitely worth another point. Huh. 1 point. I started a soup kitchen for the homeless people in my community, and I helped out at this shelter to be able to care for them. Oh, that's awesome. Another 2 points. Good for you. At this point, the man, he starts to panic, going, what else do I have to say? How am I going to get 100 points? I mean, he hasn't even hit double digits yet, and he's starting to panic. And he's just like, at this rate, I'm never going to be able to get into heaven without the grace of God. And Peter says, perfect. And that's right. Come on in. And that's it. That's where we have to be in the end, in total dependence on God for our righteousness. So what we need to do is we have to go to the first beatitude as we start to wrap this up. Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who know that they don't have it all together and never will have it all together, but they have this deep hunger for God. And then the fourth beatitude is, and blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. We don't give up hungering and thirsting because we're poor in spirit, but the first beatitude is actually the starting place for us. Always and forever, says Jesus. Always and forever. If you want a starting point, it is always in realizing that you're poor in spirit. And I need to be able to recognize it daily and to learn and to lean into that realization of what's really going on inside of me. And when I'm content with knowing my need, my desperate need, I get closer to God. And I find my worth and value and filling and my joy and my hope, everything I really need in my soul. And I don't have to defend myself or even protect myself. And I can reach out to others and I can rest because God's in control. So what have I learned on this journey through my Christian life? I think I've come a little bit closer to this. My righteousness is really just filthy rags if I'm trusting in myself to impress God, to earn favor with Him, or to feel better about myself. Some of us, we are scorekeepers, and the worst scorekeepers, long-term churchgoers, usually they're the worst. They grew up being taught to please God, and most of them are really good at it. So church becomes a place where people look like they have their act together or model it for others to see that this is what it means to live the Christian life. And all of this leads to striving and faking people out. And the reason so many people have drifted away from the church and the life of Christ that comes through the church is they simply say, that's a crock. Those people, they don't live up to it. They have the same divorce rate as everyone else. Their abuse rate to their children is just as high, and they're just as materialistic, and they're just as, and you could fill in the blank of what it is that you know you have heard, whatever it is. And the church has the audacity then to tell me that we should be functioning how I'm supposed to be functioning in regards to morals and what we should be teaching in our schools and how we should be handling our value system. Where do they get off telling us, well, the founding fathers were Christians and believers in God, and we are too, and you secular people are messing up the whole world. And they say, how pharisaical of you. Right-wing moral majority Christianity completely sucks. It's driving you nuts, it drives me nuts, and it's killing the church, and we rail against the world for what they're doing wrong. And then what we do is we secretly go out and in hidden ways we practice the same behavior. And in smugness we do it. And we tell ourselves, well, I'm not doing it at least as bad as they are. At least I'm not like them though. The only way to be perfect is to honestly accept that we are far from being perfect. And we start there. I'm not much of a golfer, but I've done it several times in my life. When I was on staff in Ellensburg, we used to go on these retreats every summer, and we'd go for about 4 or 5 days. And one of the things we'd always do is we'd go golfing, and because so many of the staff were bad golfers like myself, we would play best ball golf, which is great because what we'd all do is we'd get up to the fairway and we'd all take a shot. Whoever had the best ball, the best hit, we would all grab our balls and we would move it there, and all 4 of us would start, or 5 or however many, we would all start there, and then we would would go and all hit again, and whoever had the best hit, we would all move our balls to there. So, we'd get up and we'd shoot, I'd hit, and I would slice it right or go left into a pond. Didn't matter. Every once in a while I might get a good hit, but it didn't matter because we're all going to get to go. And so it was great because then we'd have a lot more fun. We'd start shooting par, sometimes even better. Every once in a while we'd even get a birdie. But imagine this. One day I go up to the golf course and I get to the first tee, and Jesus is standing there. And he looks at me and says, "Hey, do you want to play some best ball golf?" Huh. Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd love to play that, I replied. So Jesus takes his shot. It's a beautiful drive right down the fairway. I get up, I hit it, complete slice off to the right into the water hazard. I'm like, oh, so embarrassed. I mean, my first hit, and I've already just shanked that thing. And Jesus looked at me, he's like, don't worry, we're playing best ball. And we're just going to play from where my ball laid. Oh, that's great. So then I get up to the next tee and we take a shot, and it's really good. I did really good. He's like, "Hey, that was fantastic. That was a really good shot." I'm like, "Nice." We keep playing that way throughout the rest of the game, where we would take turns going back and forth, and I would get some really good ones and I'd have some really bad ones. And at one point I ran out of golf balls, as I kept losing them, and water hazards, every other hazard, or I just lose them. And he'd say, "Hey, here, I got more balls. I got a whole pack of them. Take what you need." And I look at him, these are like the best balls ever. And we were walking together, just having so much fun. Just having the best time, talking, hitting the balls, and we just kind of go back and forth. And finally we ended the game, had so much fun, and we're going back to the clubhouse. He says, "Hey, do you want to play best ball golf tomorrow?" Yeah, I would love that. And I was like, but really? I mean, because you could be playing with a lot of other people, and my game's not really, my game is actually pretty awful. He's like, "I love playing with you. I love playing with you because you're dependent on me for this game." I said, "Well, don't you want to play with those other guys?" I saw this other group of guys sitting over at another table, and they're laughing and they're having this really great time. And wouldn't you want to play with them, though? And he says, they don't want to play best ball golf with me because they're too good to want to play with me because they think they have it all together. They got all the right forms and they've got it all down. But if you show up tomorrow, we'll play best ball golf. And as you play with me and as you depend on me for my good game, you're going to get better at your game. And I'm going to have so much fun watching you get better at it. But we will always be connected through the game. Because when you play with me, it is always best ball golf. And that is the Christian journey. That is the Christian experience. And that is the starting point for our spiritual life. So today, may God fill you and pour His Spirit into your heart and into you and into your families. Have a great day. Thanks.